group Yanna 33, also known as CRI600, and this is our design thinking process and experience. We hope you enjoy learning about it. We believe that our journey with the design thinking process is similar to the one experienced when planting a garden and helping it grow. First things first, as with gardening, we had to gather our tools. Our first step was gathering a group of creative individuals, which was facilitated by the tutorial leaders. While it was nerve-wracking not being given the option to select our own team members, the random assignment of groups ensured diversity and intersectionality. Once we had been given our teams, we gathered our creative skills, ideas, and project goals. We noticed that while many of us feel confident as writers, not a lot of us feel proficient in video work. However, we did not let this faze us and decided to come together to do a lot of the project work collaboratively. We also had to gather a less tangible tool, knowledge. The most important piece of knowledge necessary to starting this design thinking process was gaining an understanding of what allyship is, as many of us didn't have a defined definition or understanding of the concept when we began this project. Allyship, as framed for our process, is the practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, and human rights by members of an in-group to advance the interests of an oppressed or marginalized outgroup. Allyship is part of the anti-oppression or anti-racist conversation, which puts into use social justice theories and ideals. Not only was gathering this knowledge of allyship integral to the course and its objectives, we also believe that understanding what being an ally and allyship mean will help us be better people in our future everyday lives. We also had to gather together knowledge of possible users, which resulted in a chart of extreme users. We first practiced defining heavy and light users for the potato peeler example, before applying this to our designated user group of would-be allies. As it turns out, defining users of a concept was much more difficult, as opposed to defining them for an actual product, like a potato peeler. Eventually, we were able to create a chart. A few examples of light users of allyship we identified were someone who needs to explain the term in a meeting, or someone whose friend is an activist and who wants to become more educated and involved. Some heavy users we documented were someone who is writing a book about allyship, or someone training their organization's staff about allyship. Defining extreme users was a necessary tool to begin the design thinking process, as our user has great influence on everything we develop and is central to the whole process as defined by IDEO. Next, we planted the seeds of our project, and this took shape as creating story-evoking questions. This process forced us to begin thinking using empathy, understanding how we can really connect with and learn from our users. Our team found that it was hard to ensure all questions were truly story-evoking, as some people could have chosen to answer them with a story, while others may not have. This drove us to make the comparison between a seed in the ground and this story-evoking question development. Once a seed is in the ground, you're not exactly sure what will end up growing or how your garden will turn out. At first, this is how our questions turned out, leaving us unsure of what the outcome would be. The trick with story-evoking questions is to create something that you know will give a story as an answer. To be more successful, our team tried to use the open-ended question advice given to us in class. We used phrases such as the first and last, and best and worst, and then followed up with additional questions and why statements. Some examples of questions we created were, when was the first time you knew you wanted to teach allyship to others? Why did this inspire you? As well as, when was the first time you publicly stood up for what you believe in? How did you feel during and afterwards? And why did it encourage you to continue voicing your opinions? As we developed these questions together, we really began to notice how important emotion is, as an emotional response is often the most honest one. It was difficult to come up with questions and not begin to think of answers for them ourselves, and so this was a very personal and intimate experience. While we did not share with the group we each attached our own experiences to the questions we developed. As well, we realized empathy is crucial in this process, as you don't want to trigger your interviewee in any harmful manner. After planting the seeds of our design thinking process, we needed to continue to nurture our garden to help our ideas grow. Gathering observations was like adding additional soil to a garden bed, adding nutrients to the seeds we planted when we created story-evoking questions. Developing observations from ally interviews with Ahmed, Chris, and Rachel turned out to be one of the most difficult aspects of the design thinking process, for our team at least. It was much harder to gather observations than we initially expected. It was challenging to not automatically elaborate in our minds and interpret what we were hearing and seeing from the interviewees. For us, it seemed much more simple and easy to find interpretations, which seemed strange and the opposite of what it should be true. While we did gather many observations, we also did end up with quite a few interpretations as well, that we had to push past and ignore for the remainder of the design process. As well, through group discussion, we realized that certain observations, such as what we found surprising in their interviews, relied a lot on our personal experiences and pasts. There were many things I found surprising based on my previous experiences that other team members weren't as shocked by. The activity of identifying observations to fertilize our design process garden showed us exactly why it is important to think of the user when conducting the design thinking process, as each consumer group is going to be unique and different. This is also why it was so important to have a diverse team from the beginning, to give us a diverse perspective that could help us better understand our users' needs. Making insights from our observations was slightly easier, as this is what we have been trying to do from the beginning. We see making observations as watering our design thinking garden, giving it the proper treatment and helping it flourish. Watering a garden is integral to its growth. While developing insights was easier for the team, in the tutorial on Monday, our group was informed that our sometimes people will questions were more like analysis. They did not fulfill the requirements of having a specific group of people, users, and associated actions. It was particularly hard for our group to differentiate actions from behaviors or feelings. Using collaboration and critical thinking, we developed 5 proper, sometimes people will questions, based on the interviews watched in the previous activity. We had to employ collaboration so that our statements would be diverse and genuine. The insight we decided to continue forwards with was, sometimes people will stand behind those whose voices they wish to leverage, because this way they can learn to actively listen and understand without taking over. We felt this was a very important insight, particularly as performative allyship is becoming such an issue online, where allies are taking control and trying to speak on behalf of those marginalized groups who should be sharing their experiences and opinions. This activity, developing a proper sometimes people will statement, proved to be the part that challenged us most, but ultimately we came together and watered our garden with enriched insights, which allowed us to progress into and through the next few steps very easily. Finally, we watched our garden grow and flourish. The last few steps, creating a how might we question, brainstorming a solution, storyboarding, and developing an experiment, all felt very successful. Our team had developed a strong understanding of the design thinking process, and really, solving a problem was what our creative brains wanted to do from the beginning. We needed to pick a how might we question that was not too broad, but also not too narrow, leaving room for innovative solutions. Using this advice and discussion in our breakout group, we chose the how might we question, how might we help uneducated would-be allies connect with and learn from the people whose voices they wish to leverage. While we went through the activity of creating many how might we questions, to us, this one seemed the obvious choice from the beginning. Brainstorming solutions gave us so many ideas and opportunities that we actually ended up combining multiple ideas to create a podcast where oppressed voices are leveraged. Not only is the podcast educational for would-be allies, it is connected to a blog where marginalized individuals can share their experiences and learnings. It is through this genuine exchange of information that our would-be allies can educate themselves, being fully confident knowing that everything they are learning is from those they wish to aid. Storyboarding gave us the opportunity to break down our idea to its key integral components. This gave the team an impression of just how complicated and overwhelming developing a platform such as ours could be if you didn't start from the bare bones. This was an activity that I and many of my team members plan to utilize in the future. While the experiment portion of the process was interesting, we all wish we could have conducted this portion of the design thinking process in person. It was a general feeling that we could have learned more from actually doing the experiment if circumstances were different. Overall, our experience or journey together was enlightening and enjoyable. We gathered our design thinking tools, creative individuals, and knowledge. Then we planted seeds using story-evoking questions. Next, we looked after our garden, giving it nutrients by developing observations and watering it with our insights. Finally, we got to see our garden flourish in the form of solutions and storyboards. While it was scary at first, we all learned from each other and our differences. Completing the design thinking process in these strange circumstances, of course, came with its own challenges, most of which were technological. However, even with these challenges and the inability to meet face-to-face, we all feel that this process has been eye-opening. I personally feel that design thinking is an incredible tool that I should integrate into my future academic and professional life, and this opinion is echoed by many of my group members. We have grown with our design thinking garden. Thanks for listening.